Mr. Vincent Price is a man of many interests. To many of you VOA listeners, he may be best known for his work as an actor in motion pictures, or perhaps for his work as a collector of fine art. But to some of us who have known him over a period of years, Vincent Price is known as a man of the theater, the co-author of a fabulous book on cooking, the proud owner of a magnificent kitchen in his Beverly Hills home in California, a great interest in the American Indian and the Indian culture and contribution to poetry and creative writing, and he is the owner of a famous totem pole that once belonged to the late American actor John Barrymore. Mr. Price is in Washington with us today, and we're going to talk about all of these interests and maybe even a few more.
From the studios of the Voice of America in Washington, D.C., Studio One brings you 30 minutes with one of America's most articulate and knowledgeable men, Mr. Vincent Price. With Mr. Price is VOA reporter and old-time friend and associate, Sam Pierce. Now, a conversation with Vincent Price.
Vincent, welcome to Washington and the Voice of America.
Sam, it's wonderful to see you again.
Now, you are famous for your vast knowledge of fine art, Vincent. Paintings, artifacts, furniture, gosh, so many things. Where does this knowledge spring from?
Well, I have always loved painting. I was born in a city that had a marvelous museum, St. Louis, Missouri, and it interested me from the very beginning of my career. The whole history of man through his creative act. I felt very definitely that there was a big work for me to do as a known person, an actor, to propagate interest in the visual arts. Mm-hmm. And so that has been my sort of kick.
Do you paint yourself?
No, I don't. I've tried and I've studied painting, and I had the good fortune to find out that I have no talent whatsoever.
Well, it makes it easier for you.
Yes, much easier. I can just appreciate it.
Right. Well, now, you've made quite a name for your work for Sears Roebuck. Now, how did this come about, Vincent? What exactly did you do for them in the first place?
Well, I've always thought that painting was, in the minds of the public, reserved for the rich, the special few, the educated. And Sears came to me about 5 years ago and asked me if I would like to put together a collection of paintings to go around to their stores in out-of-the-way places where, quite literally, art is known, very well known, through the mediums of communication, the magazines, and everything else. But it is not available.
Now, I think I should explain, Vince, about here that Sears Roebuck is a vast American chain of what we call department stores. You can buy almost anything from a socket wrench to a fine painting and a lawnmower to a period piece reproduction in furniture. And does that sort of describe the chain, Vince, or can you add to that?
Yeah, it does, but it has a couple of slogans that are awfully good and appeal to the American people. One is satisfaction guaranteed or your money back. In the art thing, for instance, if there was any question about the piece, whether you liked it for color or, didn't like it, you could bring it back and exchange it. Also, you could buy it on time. An awful lot of people are afraid of art because they think it costs too much. Actually, a very fine painting doesn't cost near as much as an automobile, and everybody buys automobiles on time, but they didn't ever think of this in terms of works of art. Mm-hmm. And so this policy, which is a standard Sears policy, was applied to painting. And you'd be amazed how many extremely wealthy people came to Sears and bought pictures on time.
These are original paintings.
Yes, they are all originals. I mean, I have bought over 55,000 works of art all over the world for the Sears collections. One of the exciting things is that I've commissioned literally dozens of young painters all over the world to do us limited editions of original lithographs. Mm-hmm. And I just came back from Italy where I had 20 of the top artists there do us original lithographs, which are exclusive with us at Sears.
Mm-hmm. And so when you buy a painting or a lithograph at Sears, you know this is a legitimate original?
Absolutely. We have a whole department that researches everything, and we've had some of the problems, too.
Yes.
Which everybody does, and everybody always has since the history of art began. I mean, The Greeks were imitated by the Romans, and the Romans, were imitated by the Renaissance. Actually, this whole history of fakery has sort of gone on forever. We have been terribly careful and terribly sure that things go out from us that are absolutely right.
Now, is there anything in the idea of paintings, fine art paintings, for an investment, or are they better just bought for your own pleasure?
Well, I think the investment, the real investment in art, is for your own pleasure and education. I would hate to say that I was buying a work of art on the guarantee that it was going to increase in price.
Mm-hmm. So the buying of a picture is more of a personal thing.
That's right, and the one great investment is that when it's hanging on your wall, it continues to teach you about yourself, about itself, about the painter, and about your own judgment and taste.
Well, now, in your home out in California, I have seen magnificent artifacts from various cultures and things. Now, what's the story on these?
Well, I started off being a Missouri boy, being terribly interested in the work of the primitive peoples of America, the American Indians, long time ago, prehistoric American Indian art. And from that interest in primitive art in general, and I don't mean unsophisticated art, because primitive art is highly sophisticated, I have sort of made a collection of African art and Aboriginal art from Australia, and I love primitive art. So a great deal of my own personal collection is in this area.
Since we're kind of on the culture kick, as it were, perhaps this might be the time to ask you about the famous John Barrymore totem pole that rises loftily into the air in your front yard. And first, I wish you'd tell everybody what a totem pole is.
Well, a totem pole sometimes is confused in people's minds with an object of worship. They think it's some kind of a god symbol. It isn't actually at all. What it really is the Northwest Coast American Indians telling the history of their family. The low man on the totem pole may be Sam Bear, and the next one on the way may be Elizabeth Eagle, and George Beaver, and this tells the history of the clan. And these things became objects of reverence rather than of worship because they were family histories. John Barrymore, on one of his much publicized many years ago tours on his yacht, this is told in many Barrymore books. Anyway, he was up in the off Vancouver Island, a little island called the Missouri Island, and he saw this totem pole and decided he liked it, and he asked the people if they would give it to him, in which they had no intention of doing at all. So at night he sent his crew ashore, and they cut it into 3 pieces and brought it home. And there it stood in his estate in Beverly Hills for many, many years, and after he passed away, the estate was sold, and the people thought, well, let's get rid of this big thing, so we bought it and preserved it and put it together. It's one of the great totem poles of America. It represents a sort of bear figure at the bottom and a human figure in the middle with a killer whale, which is a very big symbol up there, and then on top a sort of thunderbird. Mm-hmm. And it's about 23 feet tall and really extremely beautiful. It takes a lot of care. We have to put a thing called wood life on it every year to keep all of the little friends out of it.
Now, this 23 feet of tree, I suppose it was originally, and they're all carved,
yes.
Hand-carved. The faces are hand-carved, one above the other, and the
yes.
bodies all sitting on top of each other's heads as they go. Right?
Yeah, it's actually a very simple one, but a kind of unusual one in that it's in the round, and it's very sculptural. It isn't just piles of figures, one on top of the other. It's really an extremely beautiful piece of sculpture.
Well, now, I know this, that when I last saw your totem pole out in front of your house, it was infested internally with those little wood-eating bugs we call termites. Am I right so far?
Absolutely.
Yes.
We've had a sort of well, it's like an apartment house with a very large turnover of tenants. First it had termites, so that we had to soak it in wood life, which kills those. And before that, the woodpeckers came into the totem pole to eat the termites, naturally, and it's a very nice place to have a house. And one of the woodpeckers, they were very neat about it. They ate a complete eye out, just perfectly, right around the whole thing. So we replaced that and got rid of the woodpeckers. This year, it has bees.
Ah.
And this is quite a problem to smoke the bees out of our totem pole.
But at least the bees don't destroy the pole as the termites or the woodpeckers
some of them are
might.
carpenter bees, and I'm a little worried about them. They really can bore through a steel plate.
Well, did the woodpeckers, as they ate the termites, did they sit there and change the
Yes.
carving? I mean,
No,
aside from eating
they
out
got
the eye,
inside.
they went inside
Yeah.
and worked from the inside
Yeah.
out, I see.
And I'm really kind of afraid to open it up someday.
Well, I'm glad to have an answer anyway, because I worried about that for a long time, Vince. And now I'd like to get to a subject that I know is very close to your heart, the Vincent Price Awards for Creative Writing at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Now, just exactly what is this institute?
Well, Sam, the Bureau of Indian Affairs about 5 years ago came to the conclusion that there was no place for special children of Indian tribes. And in Santa Fe was a very marvelous plant which had been abandoned. It was an Indian school at one time. And they took it over and they created this really marvelous Institute of American Indian Art. The requirements for becoming a student in it are simply that you have a high school, part of a high school education anyway, grade school education, and that you want to re-identify with your own Indian culture. We have about 80 tribes represented in the school from all over the United States, from the Seminoles to the Potawatomis to the Iroquois to everybody all over the country. These kids come because they want to learn something about their past. And it is absolutely extraordinary. I've talked with many of them over the years. How many of them really had no idea what their past was? They were Indian children with Indian backgrounds, but they knew nothing about them because the education system in America had tried to standardize them in a way and make them just part of our regular culture, which is a very fine one and in which they have a great interest. But there's a great pride in their past. Just as I am Welsh, and I still want to identify with the music of Wales, with certain aspects of that culture I really want to know about. It gives me a feeling of really almost being more American, to know more about my background. And that's what these kids do. And they identify immediately.
Well, now, these are not kids that are necessarily living on reservations, Indian reservations, or...
Oh, many of them are
many of
from
them are.
reservations, but many of them are just kids from all
kids
over
that
the
have
place.
just gone into
That's
the
right.
American society.
That's right.
Well, in Howard Taubman's column in the New York Times, I read that the Institute was founded by the Department of the Interior. Well, that makes it a federally granted school, then,
Yes.
doesn't it? Aha. Well, now, if I understand it right, Vince, your major interest is in the field of creative writing, which includes poetry, or you are mostly interested in the poetry.
Well, I am, yes, for several reasons. I am a commissioner on the Indian Arts and Crafts Board in the Department of the Interior, and we have done some advisory work for the Institute. When I first went there, when it first opened, the thing that really impressed me most was this tremendous identification the kids had almost immediately with their poetic forms, which are very simple and very beautiful and very full of nature. And I was so impressed that I made a gesture of giving an award every year to the winners of this. And it has become really one of the sort of coveted things in the school, and is a challenge and a competition.
Well, I've read almost all of the poems in the 1962 through 1966 edition of the Writer's Reader, is what they call it. And I can't imagine anything tougher in the world than having to pick a winner. How do you do it?
Well, I don't do it. I leave it completely up to them. In the first place, I feel that it should be up to the faculty and to whoever they want to invite to be on the jury.
Just exactly what is the Vincent Price Award? Is it a scholarship
It's
type
cash
thing?
award.
It's a cash award.
Yeah.
Well, now, I'm sure that you have some favorites on these things. I wonder if we could sort of browse through the book and you could read some of the poems at random.
Well, you know what's kind of fun right now at this particular moment is that the awards are to be given very, very shortly.
And you have the winners.
I have the winners. One of them is a boy named Gray Coho. And this is a very beautiful poem of his. It's called An Autumn Dream. The downing foliage had fallen to soften the overlapping spread of the formed golden palette. Beneath the sunless afternoon, there through the webbed twigs above a silent sleeper stared a blind look, whose black hair fingered a breeze, that which stringed the cold pillow before the hazy wind-marked sky. Her image looped in the woods above, crying, tossing the grounding leaves, and illusory hailed the girl below. On her lips a prayer to the wind was less heard, only remembered the hail down the darkest mind to kill a heart. Instead of waking, the day died down into night. So was the lifeless vision till a flake of snow followed the last foliage. She walks away as the dream is never remembered nor retold. They're really
just magnificently
beautiful.
How old averagely are these?
I would say that this boy, I happen to have met him, is maybe 18 or 19. Gray Coho is one of the very, very best ones. As a matter of fact, he won the first award this year. And then there's a girl named Shirley Crawford. And I love this very light one of hers. It's called Grandfather. Grandfather sings, I dance. Grandfather speaks, I listen. Now I sing, who will dance? I speak, who will listen? Grandfather hunts, I learn. Grandfather fishes, I clean. Now I hunt, who will learn? I fish, who will clean? Grandfather dies, I weep. Grandfather buried, I am left alone. When I am dead, who will cry? When I am buried, who will be alone?
I think the one thing that hits me the hardest is the terribly subtle awareness of their heritage as Indians and the feelings of pride, and yet sometimes bewilderment about their place in today's world.
Well, that's one of our problems, is continuity. What do you do after you have re-identified a child or a young person's interest with his past? Then he goes out into the world of the white man, and how does he keep up this interest? How does he produce? There must be more and more of this and more interest in the American Indian. It isn't a question of must be. It's a question there really should be, because they are our indigenous artists, and they are magnificent.
Well, now, you have some more of these, Vincent. Would you mind reading a few more? Because they're just great.
Well, this is Barney Mitchell, Emerson Black Horse Mitchell, called The Path I Must Travel. Within the curved edge of quarter moon, I was told there is a road I must travel to meet the Divine One on this glittering crescent. Awed, I tremble, enfolding tobacco the Almighty has given us to put forth our faith prayers rolled in the precious smoke. I wait in patience for the light, gazing at glowing galaxies beyond the curve of risen silver bow. Silent I sit listening. Before me I see wrinkled old man, torch in his right hand for me. I breathe in burning leaf smoke. I hear water drum and a rattle. Fasting through the long hours, I stand before the universe. I hold forth my hands 4 times. I see the mighty one. Within the whirling mist smoke, the drifting scent of cedar, the fluffy eagle feather wakes me. I step out into blinding space. This is an extraordinary young fella, Barney Mitchell. He's just written a book about his childhood as a Navajo, and it will be published very soon. And I hear it's an extraordinarily revealing book.
Gosh, that's wonderful.
Isn't it marvelous? Here's a kind of cute one called My Day by a girl who has one of those marvelous names. Her name is Liz So Happy.
Oh, that's great.
Isn't that marvelous? Sun rays splurt over the mountain. Grass hangs desperately to the dew. The owl blinks rapidly as morning awakens. Fluttering feathers sound in the forest. Mice, muskrat rustle through the day leaves. Rich, spicy aroma of spring flowers blooming as midday nears. The meadow proudly displays herself. Green grass speckled with pink flowers, red berries hanging under green leaves. As evening draws nearer, we hear the soft chirping of the birds, the humming of the wind blowing softly. The sun waves us farewell as the owl hoots and flutters his wings. It's extraordinarily beautiful.
Now, what outlet is there for this poetry now?
Well, I kind of hope that someday when we're a little older with these awards that there'll be a book published of them and that they can contribute to magazines around the country. It's part of the faculty's job, I think, to see to it that they have an outlet and have a continuation into the world of literature. They shouldn't be separate. They should be prized.
And up until now, this little blue-bound book that we have here is really the end result.
That's it. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
Oh, well, you have any more there you could read? I hate to be greedy.
Oh, no, I love them.
They're so wonderful.
Let me see now. Here's another Barney Mitchell, who I think is just wonderful. And Barney's The New Direction. This vanishing old road through hail-like dust storm, it stings and scratches, stuffy, I cannot breathe. Here once walked my ancestors, I was told by the old ones. One can dig at the very spot and find forgotten implements. Wasting no time, I urged on. Where I'd stop, I knew not. Startled, I listened to the wind. It whistled, screamed, cried, "You, go back, not this path." Then I recalled this trail, swept away by the north wind. It wasn't for me to follow, the trail of the long walk. Deciding between two cultures, I gave a second thought. Reluctantly, I took the new one, the paved rainbow highway. I found a new direction. Pretty indicative of his, struggle within himself to find which way he wants to go.
This is the thing that hits so much in all of these poems. They're so aware.
You had one that you particularly liked, and this was a couple of years ago, I believe. Phil George, who was one of the students there. Battle Won is Lost, it's called. They said, "You are no longer a lad." I nodded. They said, "Enter the council lodge." I sat. They said, "Our lands are at stake." I scowled. They said, "We are at war." I hated. They said, "Prepare red war symbols." I painted. They said, "Count coups." I scalped. They said, "You'll see friends die." I cringed. They said, "Desperate warriors fight best." I charged. They said, "Some will be wounded." I bled. They said, "To die is glorious." They lied.
I don't know what you can say after that.
No, it's marvelous. Really marvelous.
This thing has been, I read it 2 weeks ago, and it has never been out of my mind.
No.
Just magnificent. What do you have there?
Oh, this is one of these marvelous tiny things that they do that is just an impression, just like, well, it's almost like throwing paint on a canvas. It's abstract expressionism in poetry. This is by Libby Alexander, and it was one of the awards in 1966. Tightly gripped paintbrush, paper and adoration, child's view of mother.
Oh, isn't
that marvelous?
That is magnificent.
Just absolutely great, really wonderful.
Well, Vince, we've covered an awful lot of the things that you do here, and before you leave us, I would like to ask you one more thing. Mm-hmm. How about the cookbook that you and your wife, Mary, compiled? Now, how did you happen, with all these other things, to get into the cookbook kick?
Well, I'm one of those people who love to eat. I was raised in a household where the 4 children, my sisters and brother and myself, all were given the privilege of cooking and taught by an expert who was my mother. And all through the years, I've always felt that cooking is one of the great arts, that if you can make something marvelous out of the fruits of the earth, that you have sort of complemented nature. And all over the world, as I've had a marvelous experience of traveling, I have collected recipes, and Mary and I'll go in a restaurant and we'll say, what do you think's in this? A little bit of that, a little bit of that. And usually we're wrong, or sometimes we're right. And then we ask the people, and we make little notes. And people sort of got to know about this, and finally they asked us if we would do a cookbook. Well, it was a lot more work than you think, because our little notes weren't what Aunt Minnie and Keokuk could make a stew out of. So we had to go back to the restaurants and get their permission and get the correct recipes. And then we had a marvelous woman in New York who tested all of these recipes. And if there was anything complicated or unusual, she would find a substitute or a way to make this thing. For instance, we had a thing called chicken chichen itza that comes from Yucatan. And there's a marvelous herb down there that you really cannot get in this country. So she took this. We mailed some up, probably illegally. And she took it and tested it and found that a combination of herbs would give the same flavor. Mm-hmm. And we put this together, these recipes from all over the world. And then my wife, who is a designer and a very talented gal, designed the book, and I wrote the little forwards, and it really turned out a wonderful, wonderful book.
Well, now, I've seen your kitchen, and it is everything that feature writers have said about it, and they've said a mess of words about it. Now, did you and Mary work out some of these recipes in that kitchen?
Oh, sure. I bake 3 times a week.
Oh, you bake 3 times a week?
In the first place, I like the smell of it. Mm-hmm. And in the second place, I love fresh bread.
Yes.
I have a little 5-year-old daughter, and she can hardly eat store-bought bread. She loves fresh bread so much. So 3 times a week I bake.
Then you are the master chef in the family.
No,
you are not.
I couldn't make a cake if my life depended on it, and Mary makes the most divine cakes in the world. Mine would be flat on the floor. I do the baking and a lot of the cooking, though.
Well, that's nice. And you kind of share in that kitchen, because it would be a shame just to have that kitchen to look on pictures. It's a practical and a beautiful kitchen.
Well, Ed Murrow did person to person in our house. He heard all of the comments, from everybody, and he finally called it the largest do-it-yourself project in America.
Well, it's a beautiful do-it-yourself project. Vince, this has really been a rare privilege talking with you about some of the things you've done and are interested in. And I think it must be tremendously satisfying to keep so busy and to be involved in so many related but different fields, and be as expert in them as you obviously are, and I hope that we can look forward to another conversation sometime in the not-too-distant future. And so I guess now, until then, I'd just like to say thanks so much for being with us and letting our listeners get a little closer to the world of Vincent Price, actor, art connoisseur, chef, patron of Indian poetry, and owner of the magnificent John Barrymore Totem Pole.
Thank you, Sam.
This has been a conversation with Vincent Price. Sam Pierce speaking.
Studio One has come to you from the Voice of America in Washington, D.C.